July. We're not expecting a fire drill today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave the building through the emergency exits and we'll see you in the car park. This meeting is being recorded and streamed to YouTube, therefore any members of the public present should be aware that they may be recorded even if they're not participating in the meeting. If this causes you any concern, then please let me know. Please can you switch your phones off or to silent for the duration of the meeting. And I've been asked by officers to point out there is a public questionnaire which we'd appreciate you being completed by the speakers and the other members of the public attending. The intent is to help improve our service and committee meetings for the future. My name is Peter Sieb. I chair this committee. The order in which we'll run is that I'll announce the agenda item number. The planning officers will introduce the application and any relevant updates, and will provide a visual presentation to aid members' understanding of the context of the application. I'll then call on public speakers to present in accordance with the public speaking arrangements which are on the agenda for the meeting. I will then ask members and officers if they have any points of clarification on points raised by public speakers. I'll then ask members if they have any technical questions of the officers. The entire committee will then discuss and debate the application, and members may seek further clarification on particular points from officers regarding the application or on points raised by speakers in the main debates through me. Officers will then respond to the issues and questions raised by members, and the committee will then take a decision by vote. So if I could move to the agenda now. The first item on the agenda is apologies.
Yeah, I have apologies from councillors Andy Kendall, Evie Potts-Jones, Jenny Snell and Oliver Patrick.
Anyone aware of any other apologies, or is that's the full lot, isn't it? Thank you. The second item on the agenda is the minutes from the previous meeting. You should have all received these. Is it your wish that I sign them as a true record of the meeting? Thank you very much. The third item is declarations of interest. The registrable interests of the councillors of Somerset Council arising from membership of city, parish and town councils and other local authorities will automatically be recorded in the minutes and are declared in the link that was on the agenda. So has anyone got any other declarations? Splendid. Public question time. Have we got any speakers to? No? In which case we'll move on to agenda item 5, the planning application 2203-397 full, land at Owl Street, Stocklynch, Ilminster. Colin, I believe you're taking this.
Thank you, Chair. This is a proposal to demolish 3 agricultural barns, 2 of which have been approved under Class Q for change of use to 5 dwellings, and to rebuild with 5 dwellings comprising of 1 4-bed, 2 3-beds and 2 2-bed houses. This is the site location. Owl Street runs up into Stocklynch here. This is zoomed in a little bit, and you can see Underhill Farm here and the row of houses along Owl Street here. It's an aerial view. Again, sites in the middle. Zoomed in a little bit. This is a slide showing the public rights of way in purple that run around the site. This is planning site notice on the gate to the access track to the site. We have an aerial view of the site. Barn A here, which which is the smallest barn, which did not form part of the application for the Class Q. This barn B is the large central barn, and barn C to the right. These are photographs taken from Stocklynch Lane, south of the approach into Owl Street and looking into Owl Street. This is the site entrance on the right-hand side here. Just 3 barns, barn C to the left, barn B in the middle, and barn A as you enter from Owl Street. This is both barns viewed from the east. It's elevational photographs of barn B. This is barn C, north elevation and south elevation. On the left here is the approved site plan for the Class Q, barn A, barn B, barn C, and this is the proposed site plan for the 5 houses. 1 here, 2 detached, and two detached houses here, semi-detached, sorry. And you'll notice that there is an increase in the curtilage of the site compared to the conversion. These are the approved elevations for barn B. That provides 3 2-beds and 1 3-bed houses. This is the approved elevation for barn C, providing 1 4-bed detached dwelling. These are the proposed elevations for plot 1, which is a 4-bed detached dwelling. Proposed elevations for plot 2 and 3, providing 2 times 2-bed dwellings. Proposed elevations for plot 4, providing 1 times 3-bed dwelling. And this is the proposed elevations for plot 5, providing a 1 times 3-bed dwelling. This is CGI of the proposed development from the entrance. So these are the key considerations for the committee. The principle of 5 dwellings has been approved under Class Q of the General Permitted Development Order. This acts as a fallback position and as a material consideration of significant weight. It is reasonable to assume that in the event that this application fails, then the applicant will convert the barns to residential as per the approved application, given the increase in value created. This application seeks to provide a betterment of design and quality of development on the site. Instead of 2 existing barns providing 5 dwellings, this application seeks to provide a more visually attractive development with 3 detached dwellings and 2 semi-detached, and the removal of the 3 barns. There are objections from the parish council and public representations with fears of holiday accommodation becoming predominant in the area and the general increase in the number of dwellings in Owl Street. The application before you is for residential purposes only. In order to address those concerns, a condition has been placed on the decision notice to prevent the use of dwellings as a holiday lets. The extant Class Q permission permits the increase in the number of dwellings along Owl Street by 5 at this site. There's a holding objection from Somerset Ecology Services, who feel insufficient information is provided in relation to phosphates and the need for nutrient neutrality. However, 5 dwellings have already been approved under the Class Q prior notification. The proposed development seeks approval for the same number of dwellings under the fallback position, so there will be no change in the level of phosphates produced as a result. Therefore, phosphate mitigation is not required in this instance due to the previous extant approval, despite the objection raised. There are no objections from the Highway Authority. The existing barns are 7.5 metres to the ridge, while the proposed dwellings are 8.5 metres to the ridge, with the same eaves heights as the existing barns. All 3 barns to be demolished are approximately 1,000 square metres, with the floor area of the proposed dwellings at 690 square metres, including the garages. Taking into account the internal floors proposed, there is an increase from 742 square metres of the approved scheme to the proposal's 842 square metres. The proposal increases the curtilage of the farm buildings area from approximately 0.4 of a hectare to 0.6 of a hectare to allow for car turning and gardens. In terms of landscape settings, it is relatively secluded and screened location. Views of the proposed buildings and increased residential curtilage are limited and is considered to be visually acceptable. In terms of residential amenity, the nearest dwelling at Underhill Farm is over 100 metres away, and one Owl Street over 150 metres. It is considered that this distance is sufficient not to reduce neighbours' properties' amenity and privacy. The Environment Agency flood maps show that the site and its access road, including Owl Street, lies in Flood Zone 1. Areas in Flood Zone 1 are considered by the Environment Agency to be at less than 0.1% risk of flooding in any year, or 1 in 1,000 year chance. There is no empirical evidence to indicate that the site's at risk from flooding. It is considered that, taking into account the realistic fallback position of the approved conversion, and that there are no reasons to refuse this application, and it is recommended to the committee for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The first speaker that I have down is an objector, Joe Beaumont.
Good evening.
You have 3 minutes.
On visiting this site, it is clear why the village is so concerned, especially with its proximity to other applications from the same owner. Permission was granted for the erection of a barn in 2004. Highways at that time expressed concern, but decided that as it was to be used only to store produce grown within the applicant's holding and not for livestock, there would be no objection. Later, another barn was erected. Class Q was used to increase the value with notification to build 4 houses within the barns, and having been sold to the bordering estate, increased to 5. We understand this is now a fait accompli. Class Q does not need approval, so there was no consultation. But at the very least, you would have expected Highways to have been more involved, bearing in mind the expected escalation of traffic with the virtual doubling of houses in the lane. This is a narrow, badly maintained, single-track, no-through road, and although Highways state there have been no recorded incidents, that doesn't mean there hasn't been any. When the high-pressure mains water pipe was laid dissecting this proposed site, Wessex Water commented on the narrowness of the lane in regard to contract vehicles. Children on foot and bike, many walkers from the village and surrounding areas, large farm vehicles, cars and delivery vans all use this lane. The junction, although wide, is on a sharp curving bend with walls and hedges on either side, and this has caused many near misses as, especially in a small car, it is a blind spot. There is no speed limit in Stocklinch. Traffic can be fast from all 3 directions. It is also used as a rat run if the 303 or other roads are closed. It's surprising Highways no longer recognise these dangers. Perhaps they should revisit their decision. The planning application is to demolish 3 barns and build 5 new houses, effectively in open countryside. If approved, can we be assured that this will stop at 5? Class 5 limits sites to 5 houses. But with full planning, there is tacit permission to build in open countryside. And where does that stop? How will it be policed to ensure that the houses will remain long-term lets, as stated, and not holiday homes in conjunction with other applications the owner has pending only a field away? Paragraph 105 of PPG states that permitted development assumes a barn is capable of functioning as a dwelling, and Class Q notification confirms that the barns could be sustainably converted into 5 houses. This application is for demolishing those barns and building 5 new houses. Can this really be deemed more sustainable, considering the environmental cost of demolishing relatively new barns to be replaced with an urbanised group of pseudo-barn-type houses, notwithstanding the cost of moving the water main. I quote, "Houses should be built in the
That's your
right
3
places, and the community must have a say." Thank you.
Thank you. The second speaker I have is Catherine Kroll.
I've got a slideshow that should be going with what I'm talking about.
I'll just switch that slide on. Before I Chair, before I present the slide, can I read out a disclaimer, please? It should be noted by committee members that some of the photographs that are shown in this presentation make use of telephoto lenses, which create foreshortening of the image that makes buildings appear closer together. The photographs have not been accredited to a standard accepted to make an assessment as required in a landscape visual impact assessment. An accredited photograph requires, amongst other data, the exact locations from where the photographs have been taken and the type of camera lenses used.
Okay. I am here on behalf of Stocklynch Village to give a brief presentation on planning application for Stocklynch. The presentation aims to ensure that councillors who are not familiar with site and setting fully appreciate the position, identify important aspects of the planning officer's report that are inaccurate, question Highway's continual justification for consent through planning creep, and support rejection of the application and maintain the more sustainable status of Class Q. Slide 1, please. This map shows the site clearly outside of the village, the proximity to the proposed holiday complex at Atherstone, the historic church and numerous footpaths, many on elevated ground. Slide 2, please. This is the proposed site. Please note the end of the most southerly barn. There is nothing but open countryside. Slide 3. Here, you can see the significant increase in the size of the development when compared to the Class Q. This is not similar in size as suggested by the planning officer. The red line shows the Class Q and the black line represents the proposed development. Slide 4, please. The development goes very close to a main watercourse that feeds the River Isle. Where will the treatment works go? There is far more available space with the Class Q. Slide 5, please. The next 4 slides provide evidence of how visible the site is from various footpaths, even with leaf cover. The statement made by the planning officer is fundamentally wrong. It is visible from as far as the main road to Ilminster from White Lackington and footpaths within the Dillington estate. It will look wholly out of place. On slide 8, I would like to emphasise that the view that you are looking at is of both the listed farmhouse and the site itself from the historic church. Next slide, please. So these are the views from the footpath. And again, this is the farmhouse on the right, and on the very left-hand side there you can see the site itself. Slide 9, please. The proximity to the Atherstone Barns is clear and visible from the listed farmhouse. You can see the access track, and then the barns themselves in the distance are the Atherstone Barns, so you can see how close they actually are. Next slide, please. The next 5 slides show the site from various directions. It is an unadulterated green space. I'd like you to please note that the barns are tucked against the hedgerow, and the Class Q would be much less visible and far more in keeping with the setting. The new development will be very prominent. If you
That's
could
your
next
3
slide.
minutes, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay.
The next speaker that I have is Russ Kent.
Okay, can you hear me? Right, thank you. A development of anything approaching this scale on agricultural land or elsewhere would be a first for Stocklinch and completely out of character with the village and surrounding rural landscape, which has hardly changed over centuries. Never before has the village infrastructure been challenged in this way. As chair of our basic and very small village hall in a very small village, I can confirm we can't currently accommodate all residents wishing to attend events. This new settlement would increase our population by 10% and, church apart, be effectively without any supporting amenities. Relying as the planning officer does on our hall being able to provide them is erroneous. Demolishing barns is not allowed under Class Q, neither is extending the footprint of the land on which they sit. This application seeks to do both, with a significant encroachment into agricultural land. These are substantial reasons, I suggest, for a decoupling from Class Q. The site is outside the Council's defined settlement limits in an area which it classified as open countryside, and policy texts suggest there will be a presumption against development unless key sustainability criteria can be met. You will know better than I what they are. Some environmentally sustainable measures are proposed, but they can also be achieved within Class Q. The national framework at paragraph 79 says that to promote sustainable development in rural areas, housing should be located where it will enhance or maintain the vitality of rural communities. This is in open countryside, and the degree of opposition from the community demonstrates it doesn't think it would be enhancing or maintaining it. Converting the existing barns into dwellings at this location, as per Class Q, would be a far more sustainable option for all of the three strands. The national framework at paragraph 80 says the development of isolated homes in the countryside, which these would be, should be avoided unless one of 5 circumstances are met, one or more. The only one that might remotely apply in this case is reusing redundant or disused buildings. These barns are still in regular use, and anyway, reusing them is not demolishing them, so none of the circumstances are met. The officer claims in his design scale and visual amenity, paragraph 5, that the proposal maintains the agricultural character of the area, and in the recommendations that the proposal has no adverse impact on the character of the surrounding area. How can building a small housing estate with garages and suburban-style roads, driveways and gardens in a location the local plan defines as open countryside and surrounded by fields do that? Surely it can't. Contrary to the planning officer's support for the application, the national framework, the local plan and the local community all seem to be aligned against this proposal, and it should fail. If you create a precedent by not following your own policies and restricting development to Class Q, what is to stop developers from knocking down a barn and replacing it with a residential cul-de-sac in open countryside, and without any supporting amenities, and possibly revisiting the planning process later for a more sizable development on land which would then have a change of use? Such planning creep needs to be nipped in the bud before it is too late, and today is your opportunity. Finally, this isn't NIMBYism. The site is in nobody's backyard, and that is the point. As the local plan and our slides make clear, this amenity-starved, unsustainable and unwarranted hamlet would be an open countryside. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to your 3 minutes. The fourth speaker I've got is Belinda Elks.
I live at Underhill Farm. It is a Grade 2 listed medieval thatch farmhouse at the end of a no-through lane, Owl Street. The property has enjoyed this position out on a timeless limb in beautiful green space for over 550 years, appreciated and commented on by passing walkers on the footpath and visitors to the historic church in the field behind us. The proposed development is around 100 metres from the property. The sense of visible beauty and timelessness of an historic scene will be destroyed if this permission is granted. The application will remove all restrictions on development size, and numerous statements made in the application are at best extremely misleading, at worst incorrect. The overall proposed development area will significantly increase when compared to the Class Q. Plots increase significantly when we include garages. The curtilage of the site therefore extends well beyond the existing Class Q and clearly encroaches into agricultural green fields. The development will be extremely visible. The building height will not be similar as stated in the proposal. The ridge line of all properties will markedly increase due to steeper pitch angles to the houses when compared to the barns. The planning officer's and applicant's statements are not correct. The impact on the wider landscape is not negligible. Design and appearance does not reflect the local barns. Traditional and metal barns are not arranged in neat little bijou cul-de-sacs, urban in style and not in keeping with the surroundings. Comments on sustainability are likewise misleading in relation to building materials, access, services, etc., since these can be achieved with a Class Q if the applicant were intent to do so. The existing barns are sited in a manner that conversion is easily achieved without any need for demolition, in contrast to similar fallback applications. Demolition is not necessary and is less sustainable than the Class Q conversion. The barns are structurally sound, as detailed in the structural engineering report. The numerous Class Q alternatives already justified and approved can either be built or amended. The applicant evidently never had and still has no real desire or intent to do so. The process has been a cynical, mere stepping stone to the current proposal. There is no justifiable planning reason why the existing Class Q approved applications are not completed or revised and improved. The proposal for 5 brand new dwellings will be clearly visible. It will look like and have the serious potential to become a mini housing estate in what is a beautiful, unadulterated rural setting. The fear of further planning creep and future applications to increase the size of the site is of great concern to the community and is disturbingly real. Development at Hanning Close in neighbouring White Lackington is a prime example from the same applicant. The application flagrantly ignores the feelings and needs of the local community and, if passed, will knowingly by the applicant also breach a legal covenant preventing building on the proposed site. To date, the applicant is unbothered by this legal situation.
That was your 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening. The application quotes multiple design characteristics and materials that would supposedly enhance sustainability over and above that of the existing Class Q approved scheme. This statement may be factually correct, but omits to address the fact that these could be incorporated into a Class Q design if wanted. Wheelchair access, photovoltaic cells, air source heat pumps. These are all easily achievable with a good Class Q design. The proposed level of insulation is also achievable in the Class Q scheme. If good and effective insulation would result in a smaller floor area, then the applicant can either reduce the number of bedrooms, build smaller, or revert to 4 properties. Design features like inset balconies to provide protection from solar gain can also be incorporated by the architects if instructed. The Class Q approved designs could be amended if the desire to achieve environmentally friendly concepts are genuine. There are 2 watercourses either side of the development that flow all year round. They flow into tributaries to the River Isle. This area of land is waterlogged in the winter and the tributaries can be extremely full. The proposed development will increase the hard surfaces significantly and exacerbate this. Any foul water treatment plant is at risk of overspill and pollution. A bigger development inevitably introduces more light pollution. The site currently has no electricity and existing residents of Owl Street regularly experience outages. Bigger developments create more burden on already challenged facilities. Stocklynch is a small, rural South Somerset village with very limited infrastructure. Whilst we have a modest village hall and a church, there is no regular bus service, no school, no employment opportunities, no shop, and no medical facilities, and slow response times from emergency services. All residents have to drive out of the village for their amenities, shopping, work, education, and leisure. Furthermore, it is questionable whether there is any demand for 5 additional dwellings to provide long-term let opportunities. The suggestion that the church and village hall space are adequate amenities for a development of this nature does not stack up in practical terms when the intended occupancy of the properties is considered. The village hall, which is only circa 10 metres by 5 metres of usable space, is already beyond capacity for village events, and the proposed development would increase the village's population by more than 10%. In the words of the local plan, in simple terms, it is not realistic to expect a small rural settlement with such few services to be made a more sustainable location through new development. This in itself uncovers the likely true intended use of the properties, which is for holiday accommodation directly linked to the substantial holiday complex proposed for Atherstone and part of the ever-increasing holiday let business run by the applicant, which is felt by many long-term residents to be eroding the small rural communities of Stocklynch and White Lackington. Thank you.
Thank you. Within time. We now have White Lackington Parish Council and Anusha Butcher, is it? Anusha. Thank you.
This site is situated in a small village with no public transport links, no local shops, no village pub, no health and social care facilities, and no facilities for children, whether recreation, preschool, primary school or secondary. The properties proposed would attract high monthly rental costs which do not accord with the housing demand of the settlement area. The applicant has previously been clear that where their developments do not achieve the stated intention of long-term let, they will move to holiday let use. It is known that enforcement of planning conditions is scarce and discretionary, and that there would be nothing to prevent an application for discharge of any condition regarding holiday use. Long-term let will not be achievable in this location, and the reality is that the proposed development will be used for holiday lets. The present application's relationship with other extant applications made by the applicant is therefore highly relevant. The site at Atherstone Farm sits immediately adjacent to the site of the proposed development. If both applications are granted, the outer extremity of each development site will sit less than 0.25 miles apart across land in common ownership. The Atherstone application is for a full holiday complex, 27-bedroom, complete with facilities including a swimming pool, for which the applicant has confirmed will be utilised by all of their other holiday business customers. The Atherstone application includes for the demolition of the agricultural barn at that site and the erection of an additional 2 5-bedroom properties, striking similar tones to the present application. The applicant also submitted a notice of intention to create a farm tract pursuant to the rights of permitted development from Atherstone Farm to the site of the present application in March 2023. That notice was silent on the extant planning applications, misled as to the proximity to public footpaths, and carefully omitted details of the full intended use of the track. The council required a full planning application as it was not considered to be truly for agricultural use. The track was likely intended to link the two sites both for ease of construction and thereafter to allow for the traverse of occupants between the two sites. The pattern of applications demonstrate a clear intention to create a large holiday complex straddling both parishes and ultimately joining the small rural hamlet of Atherstone to the village of Stocklynch by way of a large development in open countryside. There is no demand for such facilities. The applicant is the owner of 5 existing holiday properties in the immediate vicinity, has a further extant application for another 6 2-bedroom properties in White Lackington, is presently developing a further 2 properties, and is the owner of Dillington House, a 43-bed property, which is shortly to revert to the applicant following the long-standing commercial arrangement with what is now Somerset Council. In summary, if permitted, the development would diminish rather than enhance the sustainability of the rural settlements in question. As per the local plan, the local community is best placed to determine local need and what will make their settlement more sustainable. These plans have not come from, nor are they supported by that local community. Accordingly, the application should be refused.
Good evening. I am Fiona Day, Chair of the Stocklynch Parish Council. We are a small rural community of 56 houses and a population of approximately 115 people situated in open countryside down single-track lanes. In addition to the written objection made by the Parish Council, there have been a further 22 objections made online by village households. This represents more than a third of our village. But please understand that there is very strong opposition across the entire village towards this proposed development, as can be seen from the number of Stocklynchers in attendance this evening. The Parish Council have read through the report prepared by Tracy Meekin, Planning Case Officer. Sadly, not one of the concerns raised in any of the objections made online have been taken into consideration, and our issues with this most unwelcome proposal remain just as valid. To date, the whole process of understanding and responding to this most unwelcome application has been highly stressful and time-consuming, requiring multiple village meetings and communications, and on several occasions has involved the precious time of our councillors Joe Randall Green and Adam Dance. This application provides no benefit or value to our village and only serves to improve the wealth of a greedy developer. You should be made aware of a large, high-pressure water mains pipeline that was installed in 1998, running directly across this proposed site, connecting the Stocklinch Reservoir to new houses built on Station Road in Ilminster. I recently wrote to you all urging you to come and visit the site. For those on the planning committee who have been unable to visit us in Stocklinch, we hope that the slides provided will have given you a better understanding of the situation and close proximity to the site at Atherstone. However, I would strongly urge you to take the time to come and see for yourself what is being proposed before making any decision on this application. It is your responsibility to carry out due diligence. Please do not walk blindly into deciding on something you do not fully understand. Thank you to the Planning Committee for giving our village the opportunity to present our arguments to this strongly opposed planning application. We believe we have given you multiple robust reasons to refuse this application, including failure to satisfy economic, social and environmental sustainability considerations, the site lying outside any development area identified in the local plan, and that this application does not qualify for approval under paragraph 79 and 80 of the NPPF as detailed on page 8 of the Planning Officer's report. And finally, central government made announcements only yesterday that all new housing should be sustainable, made in consultation with local communities, and not to be built in open countryside. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for keeping to time. We now have the Somerset Council Division Member for the area, Councillor Jo Randall-Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. This application for 5 dwellings seems to rest on the premise that because of the Class Q permitted development rights of the barns, the application should be allowed. Once the barns have been demolished, surely the Class Q will cease to exist in this field. There will be no permitted development rights, so this application should be looked at on its own merits for what it is, development in the open countryside. This is an entirely new and different application. The applicant states that there will be 21 parking spaces, 14 cycle spaces and 4 motorbike spaces. Surely this is well over the requirement of 14 parking spaces for this number and size of dwellings. This over-provision suggests to me that the proposal is not merely for this residential housing. Where will this go in the future? The applicant also suggests that there would only be 3 traffic movements during peak times. This is very optimistic if, as stated, the houses are for long-term lets. You would expect people needing to drive to work and take their children to school having many more than 3 traffic movements at peak times. This location, as you have heard, is not sustainable. No shops, school, bus, pub, medical centre. The small village hall and a church, which is several hundred yards across a field, hardly accessible for the old and infirm. In order to promote sustainable development in rural areas, housing should be located where it will enhance or maintain the vitality of rural communities. I cannot see how the proposed dwellings in the middle of a field outside the village will do this. The application must be considered, as you have heard, alongside the proposal for the track from the holiday complex at Atherstone. Why? Because we need to know whether these houses are going to be part of the holiday complex with direct access. Will they be used just by holiday makers? The proposed materials for these houses are not in keeping with the village. They may have the appearance of barns, but why? Why, when the barns will have gone, should they be made to look like barns? This is not a proposal to build housing in the village for the village. There is no reason to show that they are needed, and they are clearly not wanted. This application will not fulfill any local housing need. So there are some big questions that need answering. Is there a need in the village for housing, and why weren't the villagers consulted and involved in discussions before the application was submitted? Will the proposed dwellings be for long-term rent, as stated in the application, or is this for holiday lets? This is an unsustainable location in the open countryside with a water main running through the centre and will be seen from the footpaths all around. It will have a seriously detrimental effect on the locality and the environment, and I ask you, committee, please to consider very, very seriously about this application, because I believe that if it is approved today, that it could be the precursor for many more dwellings in this situation in the open countryside. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. As you know, Class Q planning has been granted on the site for 5 houses, so I wanted to go over what we're trying to achieve by altering the design and briefly respond to some of the objections. Our goal is to maintain the agricultural style and character of the buildings, but improve their design and make the new houses more environmentally sustainable than they would be if we had to build out the Class Q within the existing barns. By adjusting the layout of the site, we can give each dwelling more privacy and improve the views, but we can also change the aspect of the buildings and their openings, making better use of natural daylight and the heat of the sun. Shading is also better with the new design, and this will minimize overheating in the summer months. And by not using the existing steel structures, we can minimize cold bridging to improve the insulation, all of which will lower energy demand and reduce the environmental impact. In terms of aesthetics, the plot is on the edge of the village, and although the intention is to build houses rather than barns, we wanted to preserve the agricultural nature of the buildings to make them as sympathetic as possible to the rural surroundings. As you can see in the proposals, the design includes a natural timber finish, standing seam metal roofs, and full-height recessed openings that will look like the openings on the end or side of a barn, and we've responded to feedback from the case officer to further improve the agricultural look of the design. Turning to the comments, there have been objections on the basis of highways and the scale of the development. I don't think implementing the Class Q planning would change the situation in respect of either, and highways have confirmed that they have no issues with the development. Other comments reference other nearby applications of ours. Firstly, our application to convert the barns at Atherstone into holiday accommodation, an entirely separate 2019 application that has unfortunately been held up by phosphates. We applied for those barns to be developed as holiday accommodation because in our view that's the most appropriate use for them when we're trying to diversify the farm's income. If we had plans to holiday let the buildings on Owl Street, then we would have no problem in applying for planning as such, which it seems to me our application at Atherstone illustrates. But our intention is to let them on a longer term basis, which is how we operate the vast majority of residential properties the estate owns. The other application was for an agricultural track which was intended to reduce the traffic the parish are concerned about. At the moment, the estate has no access to the land we own around the buildings at Owl Street, which includes farmland as well as buildings. And currently we have to drive heavy tractors, trailers, drilling, spray and combine equipment through Stocklynch and along Owl Street so we can farm it. We applied for the track to create an alternative route for this equipment and to reduce the heavy machinery traffic along Owl Street so we don't have to drive it through the middle of a residential development at the end of Owl Street, which will exist whether these houses are created by this planning application or the consented Class Q. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you once again for keeping well within time. I think probably the best thing to do is start off, officers, if you could respond to the points which have been raised by the speakers, and then we'll see if any members want further clarification.
Yeah, I've just got a couple of points. The sort of reference to the use of the village hall, that is a reference to policy SS2, which seeks to look at how many facilities are in the village to determine whether it's an SS2 settlement, and that's why that reference to the village hall was made. It's not specifically saying that the whole is capable of taking all the residents from the new development. The other point being raised in terms of use of a condition to limit the use so that it can't be used as holiday lets. Absolutely right. That an application can be made to remove that condition, and that's something that we would consider at that particular time. It's not to say that we would remove that condition. I think they're really the only two points that I would like to address.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple. The first one is you actually state in one of the paragraphs that there's no listed building within the setting of the barns, but actually Underhill Farmhouse, according to Historic England, is a listed Grade 2 building, and it does sit fairly close to the barns, so I'm surprised that it has been completely left out of this report. That's my first question. The
Okay,
second
can
one
we-
is, sorry? Yes, of course.
Thank you, Chair. It's considered that given the separation from this site of over 100 metres, it's considered that the impact on its historic setting is not affected because of that distance.
Yeah, but also to comment, I would have thought if there is a
one
listed building, that it
question.
should even have been referenced, even with the comments you've made. However, at the very beginning of the presentation we were given from the objectors' side, from the villagers, you put a disclaimer up about the quality of photographs, that they should be accredited. What confirmation do we have that the photographs that our officers present are also accredited and presented to identically the same standard? Shouldn't it be like for like? Source for goose is source for gander.
Yeah, the photographs that were taken weren't using zoom lenses. They were taken just with a standard lens on the camera. They could potentially be recorded with the GPS set on the phone.
Councillor Whale.
Thank you, Chairman. At the start of this report, I get the declaration, I'll get to it in a minute, is that we are here today, the main purpose is sustainability. That's on page 19. It is decided the application will refer to the Planning Committee to discuss the matter of sustainability. The one thing in the principal presentation by the planning officer we didn't hear about was sustainability. We've heard a lot from the complainants, so can we just have from the officer the reason that this is sustainable? It's in the report, I know, but I think for the record we ought to hear the reason and which part of the planning law he's insisting this is sustainable. That's the first question, Chair.
In terms of sustainability, the fallback position of the Class Q has got to be taken into consideration. It is a significant material consideration. So when we're talking about sustainability, we have an approval for 5 dwellings there. So, and when we talk about the building regs, having a new development allows us to improve, or allows the developer to improve upon its sustainability.
Secondly, can he explain to us, or to me anyway, the fact we've got the history, which is on page 22, and we have the history which is presumably of the site itself, which is 3 applications, and then the other relevant applications surrounding the area. Are these, why are they relevant? Are they all within the ownership of the applicant, or are they in close proximity? What is the actual relevance? It's unusual to see that on a planning application. Can you explain the relevance?
Relevance is that they are neighbouring applications. So the planning officer considered this important. I'm surmising, but I would have thought that during talks with the applicant, with taking note of the letters of objection that came in, that these applications were brought up. So it's that's why I say they were put in there in terms of the relevance.
Okay, Councillor Ashton.
Thank you, Chairman. There was a mention of a high-pressure water main across the site. Normally, Wessex Water specify an exclusion area, exclusion distance from high-pressure water mains, but that doesn't seem to be included in the documents here. I know it may not even be a planning consideration, but is there any more details on that?
If I could share my screen. The light area on the map there is on the aerial is the route of that high pressure, and it just skirts the edge of the development. So pretty much all that area there will be in the garden area.
Thank you. Excuse me. Excuse me. You're not part of the meeting. You've had your say. Jenny, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just a question, please. So, according to my research, Class Q must be within the footprint of the existing building. Is that correct, please? And the secondary question, if there was no Class Q development, right, would we approve these new houses?
Joe, she absolutely right. The Class Q is within the footprint of the existing barns, and had this not been a Class Q, then it would be we would be having a different discussion right now.
Yeah, there are High Court cases which have established the weight you can give Class Qs as a fallback, and it really requires that there's a reasonable prospect of them being implemented. So they don't have to have demonstrated they have started work on the site, they just have to convince you that they will do the scheme. Now, often that could require some sort of assessment of values of properties, which I imagine would justify converting these buildings if nothing else was possible. So, in essence, you've got two buildings which are individually large, which would have parking, residential curtilages and additional windows, and that's a fact. So the issue for you is the difference. It's not so much the difference, but it's the harm that a residential alternative to the barn conversions would generate. I think that's the focus for the discussion, because in all other respects, the trip generation will be the same. There will be cars on site. There will be people living in those properties.
If I could just ask you to answer the question, which was, there is legal precedent in terms of the way in which planning applications in this situation, in the middle of nowhere, with a prior notification approval under Class Q, have to be considered by committees.
Yeah, as I said, sorry if I didn't explain that sufficiently clearly. Yes, because the Class Q exists, it's a fallback. So your starting point isn't, as Mr. Beecham has said, a open site with nothing on it, wherein you would say this is an unsustainable location for development. The starting point is we have 5 houses approved legally, and therefore it's not the impact of 5 houses, it's the difference between the approved scheme and the proposed scheme, and for that difference to be materially harmful, if that makes sense. I think the reasons that councillors might ask for something to come to committee might not necessarily reflect all of the planning policies that we have. For instance, our policy about sustainable development as it relates to dwellings referred back to the Code for Sustainable Homes, which was promptly ditched by government soon after South Somerset adopted it. So we don't actually have a specific policy that allows us to secure over and above building regulations. So for us, building regulations would apply to the conversion or the new build and would set the standard for the redevelopment. And the argument that the applicant will make is that it is easier to start from scratch than to try to retrofit an existing building which was constructed for another purpose.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne, you wanted to ask a further question?
Yes, please. Thank you. I may have a couple of other points. The first one is, I noticed that the plan you put up was a block plan showing what the layout was going to be. However, if you were to go into the raw planning data file, there is plans showing the actual layout, so showing far more detail of what they would look like on the ground. So it would give you a flavour of what they actually look like rather than just anonymous blocks. So in terms of how they work, in terms of in and out and room size. Do you have those plans as part of your presentation? And if so, could you put them up, please?
Chair, you'd have to give me a few minutes to try and get those plans up.
Okay, was there a second question?
I'm trying to get my head around the phosphates because it seems that if you apply for Class Q, you're almost let off phosphates. It doesn't matter. Yet this is a 5-house proposal that's going to now be converted from Class Q into a full planning. So in theory, for 5 houses, all of which have ensuite bathrooms, we're discarding it, despite Somerset Ecological Services having an objection, which seems rather strange. Would we not be wise to check that actually with Natural England? Because it seems as though we're creating one hell of a loophole here.
I think we understood your question out from the first sentence, so if you could keep your questions brief, that would help the committee enormously. John, do you want to answer that?
I mean, this is an issue of misunderstanding by Somerset Ecology Services regarding what a fallback might be. I had a meeting with them and what was formerly Somerset West's solicitor, who's been leading across the councils on phosphate solutions. And there is a position that all the councils have adopted, which is that a Class Q, which has discharged any pre-commencement conditions and therefore is capable of being implemented with no further involvement from the local authority, is the starting point for determining the likely significant effects of development. And if the likely significant effects of development are no greater than could be done without any further reference to the authority, then there is no obligation to secure phosphate mitigation. Somerset Ecology Services were at a point of misunderstanding probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago on that, and that point's been clarified to them. And as I said, that point is in the guidance which we've issued to officers and will shortly be putting on the website as a sort of a public steer. But it is a factor in the Ramsar site. The permitted development is excluded from dealing with nutrient neutrality. Perversely, in the River Axe catchment, which is a special area of conservation, permitted development does have to deal with nutrient neutrality. It's simply one of the quirks of overlapping legislation.
It might have been helpful if that explanation could have been put in the report. It would have saved a lot of confusion.
Are you in a position to show the board view?
Thank you. That shows a bit more clearly. It gives you a flavour of the barn, the car movements, and what the spaces and the garages are going to look like. So you can actually see, it gives you a flavour of what that site is actually going to look like in practice. And the argument that potentially it is a rather suburban design for a very small scale rural setting.
Okay, I've got a question. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. There's Tim, I believe you had a further question.
Thank you, Chair. Quite a conundrum, this one. I'm definitely sympathetic to some of the arguments that have been put forward, especially with the development.
We're on questions to the officers.
Yeah, absolutely, within the open countryside. Now, the problem is with our lack of a 5-year land supply, I don't really hear any material objections amongst those. It seems to me that this is a choice between the two, the existing Q class or this, and I would argue that this is a more sustainable, and it's not an issue here that we can refuse it, is it? Yeah. So it's simply a choice between, effectively, the Q class or this particular development.
Chair, that is correct. You're looking at essentially the change in design and perhaps the increase in the curtilage for the residential properties, and that is the two areas where the committee should be concentrating.
Thank you for that. Second question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in your opinion, does this proposal, is this a more sustainable proposal than the Q class?
That's what I'm led to believe, that in terms of the construction methods that can be used for a new build is different than the conversion.
Councillor Whale.
Can I go back to the legal precedent argument we heard about a moment ago? And are we to understand that the Q class is carried forward into the current application, even though the reason for the Q class are being demolished and it's going to be a brand new site?
It's a sort of semi-convoluted approach, because originally, obviously, the permitted development rights were extended to find new sources of housing, and quite often they ran contrary to local plan policies. So there's always been this tension that Class Q approves housing specifically in areas where local plan policies might not do it. But they have been around for some time now, and we do have to acknowledge that they are a legitimate delivery model, and they do establish the baseline. So for your decision, we're not saying, you can't say it's a departure from policy, that's the end of it, because clearly 5 houses will be constructed here in one way or another. So the issue is, and it's not really actually a swap between the two, because you can't say we prefer one more than the other. The issue is one respectful to landscape character and one harmful to landscape character? And that's really where the judgment is, because a lot of the other factors will remain very similar number of people, a similar nature of occupation, a similar number of vehicle movements, a similar number of gardens and garden paraphernalia. So the issue is about the landscape impact of the two schemes, because as Mr. Beechman said, from our perspective, building control will deal with achieving air tightness and if you like, building efficiency. They may set a bigger challenge to the Class Q conversion, because as I say, you're starting from having to retrofit quite a lot of stuff rather than starting with a familiar construction model. But that's another argument. Obviously, Class Qs came in because reusing buildings was seen as being sustainable. But I think if you ask an architect, they'll tell you that it's not quite that easy to define sustainability between a conversion and a new build.
Can you just hold for a moment, because I want to ask a question. I think, I'm not sure whether you misspoke or whether I misheard, but my understanding is we have to deal with the application before us, and the question is the additional, is the harm created by the application, which would include any delta between the existing permission for a Class Q and this? If there were harm involved in that, then we could consider it, but you're actually telling us there's a benefit.
I think in terms of the sustainability position, it's difficult for us to say that you have a planning issue to deal with because we don't have a policy. We're simply talking about how building regs would deal with the conversion as opposed to a new build. And the information that I've had has been it's not as simple as to say we use an existing building, ergo it must be more sustainable because you potentially have to do a lot more work to the existing building. But I think that's the side issue here. That the real issue is the Class Q has used existing buildings, so it's created one impact, bigger buildings, fewer. The planning application creates smaller buildings but operates on a different layout. And that's where really the judgment has to lie because the only difference between the two is going to be the landscape impact. It's not going to be the nature of the use.
Thank you. I think that's a bit clearer. Councillor Weld, do you still want to
come back on the point of my original question? Does Class Q have to prove the same sustainability in the community sense as this application has to? And I think, do you have Class Q? Does it have the sustainable we have here in this application, or are they separate?
Class Q sets far fewer challenges in terms of policies that you need to deal with because Class Q isn't a policy-based decision. It's based on simply the assessment of highways, flooding, the location you're in, whether it's an AONB or not, and whether the building's capable of being converted. It's not talking about are you in a settlement with 2 or more facilities. So, as I said, that had created one of the tensions between planning officers' traditional approach and what government was imposing through a range of prior approvals. But the prior approvals are part of the establishment now, and we do have to work with them as a starting point.
Sorry, beg your pardon, I pressed it, but not hard enough. So my question was on proposed finishes. The applicant has mentioned timber boarding and steel roofs. What sort of pallets are we talking about? And are those adequately controlled by the condition that's recommended?
Chair, that's, I was just going to say that there's a condition that controls those materials, and at that stage we'll be able to decide on exactly the materials to be used.
And just to elaborate on that, I'm presuming that based on the concerns raised over distant views of a potentially urban view, you would be looking for muted tones to actually fit the background.
Absolutely.
And the second question was to do with the incremental development point that was raised by various speakers. What can we do to assure ourselves that this is 5 dwellings and never more?
Given the site's location, and obviously taking the fallback position of the Class Q, it's unlikely that we would be looking at approving any further application that came in for additional housing here.
And finally, one of the speakers mentioned the height of the barns, the height of the roof line, and we saw distant views where the upper ridge of a barn was prevalent. Can you just give us an indication of the height of the dwellings compared to the barns?
The eaves height will remain the same. The ridge will be approximately 1 metre higher.
Do we have any other points of clarification? Okay, thank you. I think we've also covered off the technical questions. I think we're ready for debate.
Yes, having sat through the original Class Q, when we looked at the barn conversions, I'm slightly disappointed with this. When we looked at it before, with the barn conversions, one of the things we considered that it didn't change the character of the area because you were maintaining the barn structures that were there and changing them. And also the use of land. Obviously, there's a lot of press about taking up agricultural land, which obviously the barn conversions didn't do. This obviously extends using some of that land. Also, I would have thought that obviously the traffic flow onto the site during the construction phase is going to be a lot more with this than it would have been with the barn conversions, because you're not taking down the barns. Yes? You're looking bemused, Peter.
I'm wondering if you want to comment upon that.
That's a really difficult question. I don't have the answer whether the construction traffic for conversion will be less or more for a new build.
Because I know that in general applications, flow of traffic during construction is one of the things that, you know, is brought up. And I just wondered whether there was a comparison for one site or another.
With this application that's currently, and there's a condition that is that controls the construction method. With the conversion, there is no conditions that cover the construction method at all. So, perversely, the full application will allow us to have a construction management plan in place.
Can I just say, I think...
Yes, sorry.
I think, you know, understand the concern, but that's speculation. And actually, the applicant pointed to the fact that some work had been done to avoid going through the village. So, you know,
okay, I just put it in because I felt it was a factor. You know, but all in all, I think that from the phosphates issue, we clearly know that there's no difference between one application and the other as far as how many dwellings and the number of people. So really, I'm sort of disappointed that we're going away from that, and I far preferred, unfortunately, the first. I think it's unnecessary, yes. I know, this is where we come unstuck, because, yeah, I know, yeah. But just on the principle, but I'll think about it while everybody else has a go.
Councillor Osborne.
Okay. I think one of the things worth bearing in mind is that this is a full application, FUL, which means that the planning policies of the local authority, out of date or not out of date, kick in. When you come to Class Q, it was established very early on when Class Q regulations came in, and various local authorities in the early days turned down an awful lot of Class Q barn conversions applications on the ground of sustainability. And they're actually told that actually, in this instance, it's not sustainability. Basically, as long as the building is sound, the highways are okay, you're not in an A and OB conservation area, and it's not listed, go ahead. This is a different creature in that, as we can see, it is a full application. The applicant is not going to go away empty-handed. It just means that in the event that this application fails or falls, whichever word you prefer, he's still got a Class Q to build 5 houses, but possibly not the 5 houses that he would actually ideally like to build to perhaps optimise that site. What it is doing is creeping considerably beyond the original curtilage into open country, and as a full application, then the restrictions and the protections that go with development in open countryside should be respected. And I do feel in this instance that this particular development would be harmful to the setting of Stocklinch, which is a very small, very rural agricultural hamlet, and this introduces, with double garages, the driveway in and out at the front, it does introduce a suburban element of design, regardless of what the applicant may feel. In terms of things like air source heat pumps, insulation, solar panels, you can do that with the existing building. And in fact, you've actually got the certification to say that the building will cope with it, or you wouldn't have got the Class Q in the first place. Quite how you put that into planning ease, I don't know. But there is a default setting there. The applicant is not walking away empty-handed. He can still have his 5 houses, just not perhaps the 5 he wanted.
Thank you. I still haven't heard the reason for refusal. Jenny.
Thank you. So I think I came to this meeting thinking, well, why shouldn't we replace it? You're not getting any more houses. And actually, listening to people has changed my mind. And I actually think that they're not having a barn conversion, they're having a new housing estate. And I think that's a huge difference. So I would suggest that we could perhaps say it was a detrimental impact on the landscape character. You've gone away from a barn conversion, you're building a new housing estate.
Can I just ask the planning officer to comment specifically on landscape character as opposed to the form of the development, because I think you've had some specific, you've given specific advice on that.
When we assessed the application, we looked at the landscape setting in terms of its long-term views from landscape perspective, and this is a fairly secluded site, fairly well screened from public points of view, and we considered that the overall impact was acceptable.
Just clarify, you're saying some harm but not significant harm, is that correct?
I guess like all conversions, all building works, they have some sort of visual impact, but in this case, in terms of the additional height, which is 1 metre to the ridge, the increase in the curtilage of the building is considered that was acceptable in this setting.
Thank you very much. I would go back to my point. I asked the question on page 19 again, and it seems we've gone away from it. The application to refer to the planning committee to discuss the matter of sustainability. And as it's a full planning application, surely we are to look at sustainability under our local plan, SS2, I believe, and decide whether this new development of 5 houses is sustainable under the rules of that plan. And I would suggest I would say it isn't. To say that the village hall, tiny village hall, which I know, and the fact it's got a church a mile away, makes it sustainable under our local plan, I don't think holds water. And I'd like to suggest that we refuse this on the fact that it's not sustainable under our local plan. SS2, I believe. I'm right in saying?
I think you've had directly contrary advice. Perhaps we could ask the planning officer to confirm.
Yeah, policy.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I think you've had direct contrary advice. In other words, they've considered it under SS2. Your argument may be with SS2, but actually you've had advice as to whether this meets SS2, which was against what you want to say. Which is why I'm asking the planning officer to confirm what he said.
I think the issue is if we decide that we're going to ignore the fallback, which is 5 houses being built through a conversion, we're not going to impress an inspector with the quality of our case. So, you know, yes, if there were no buildings here and this application came in, it would be refused against policy SS2 because of its location, quality of the road, footways, etc. But there is this fallback, and this fallback we can't prevent from happening. And if we don't recognise that the fallback exists, I think we're weakening our case. I think probably Councillor Kenton was getting closer to the ground I think that you need to focus on if you wish to pursue a recommendation to overturn the officer's view.
sorry. I think it might be helpful if Councillor Whale actually saw the precedent, which is very similar to this situation. It was an obviously not going to tick the box for sustainability location. However, because of the Class Q, the High Court said you can't JR on that basis.
I'm sorry, Chair. That's the second meeting in a row you've tried to hand me papers. And all right, you can hand me High Court appeals and decisions as long as you like. But you know and I know it's only as good as the next case that goes to the High Court. It might be a precedent at the moment, but it doesn't stop us making a decision against that High Court decision. I'm sorry. I haven't got. You don't. Do you really, Chairman? Sorry. Do you really? Is a what, sorry, Chair?
It was a while back. Yep. I have. Lights on. Right. It's yet again like the previous meeting. I can't put this in planning, particularly in context, in policy terms, but this seems quite incongruous compared with the development of the existing houses in the area. That they are built alongside a street. That this is almost as if you'd taken a small housing development and plonked it in the middle of a field. And that's what seems to be quite, it doesn't make sense to me. I know a metre higher roof line may have only a minor impact, but it is a significant impact. And the view of this is that someone has built a housing estate in the middle of a field, whereas the Class Q development is a barn that's been converted for residential use. I still don't understand quite the argument that you can have Class Q development which doesn't require any sustainability rules at all. And suddenly, because someone has done that, you can put in a planning application which is almost totally unrelated to that, because this is demolishing it and starting from scratch again, and saying, because there was extant Class Q development there already, that therefore you don't have to worry about sustainability. Surely we must consider sustainability unless a particular application actually, or a particular process says you can set that aside.
I think what you're identifying is the fundamental flaw that planning officers have had with the raft of PD extensions that have been introduced in the last 10 or 12 years. That, you know, the loss of shops or the loss of other facilities or employment sites where no policy position could be applied has been something that I think has irked officers. But trying to apply policy to a judgment that specifically excludes you from doing it doesn't win the case. I think the point that you're making here again is what are you starting from? You're starting from barns in the corner of a field, which you would expect to see. What are you looking at now? Well, you're looking at a sort of more fragmented layout with houses that look like barns but are adopting different positions because they're suiting a layout for housing rather than the reuse of buildings. I think somewhere in there is probably the best case that you have in terms of challenging the landscape impact.
Okay, we have Jenny.
Going to make a proposal. So I'd like to say that we turn down this application on the basis that the demolition of the barns and the development of a housing estate has a detrimental impact on the landscape character of the village. I made a proposal. I don't propose to have a debate about it.
Well, you'll get a debate if you get a seconder. But I'm just suggesting you might want
But
to...
you're currently debating with me, so like.
No, I'm trying
please.
to improve your recommendation by offering you a suggestion that it's actually the design and character of this development rather than the landscape harm that is that we've had advice on.
No,
But
sorry, it's the fact that you're demolishing barns that they have permission to change into a bar conversion, and you're building a housing estate.
Okay, you've got a seconder, so we should debate your proposal. Does anyone want to say anything about that? Can I just ask officers whether they would like to summarise what they believe the proposal would be, because we are obviously going to be looking at a reason for refusal. I think members are clearly concerned about the setting of Stocklynch and the result in the change of the built form from the Class Q.
I think the focus is probably you needing to describe what the harm is that you're concerned about, and it seems that the harm that you're concerned about is that the distribution of buildings reflects a housing layout, because it does. The parking is all, unique to each plot. Each plot has a equal-sized garden, so you've got an arrangement and distribution of buildings which reflects a housing layout more than a rural building conversion, and the buildings themselves are of a more domestic scale than the barns. Perversely, the barns individually are bigger, but they are something you're more familiar with. So I think that's something within it's the scale of buildings and distribution of buildings and associated parking, which is creating the clearly residential, or the residential character, which wasn't achieved by the reuse of barns on their original footprints. I think that's probably where your landscape character and estate, I wouldn't use estate for 4 houses necessarily, but layout certainly.
Sorry, I do apologise. I'm not pressing the button hard enough. If you're happy to delegate the final wording to officers, I think that the thrust of your proposal is quite clear, that we refuse around the urbanisation in this landscape area. As officers, are you happy that the debate has clarified sufficiently for you to take that upon?
Well, I think from some of the comments that have been brought forward, it is about where the buildings are on the site, the scale of the buildings, and the relationships with the buildings and their ancillary uses. So I think we were fairly clear that the concern is about the slight extension of the curtilage and the introduction of a scheme that delivers housing looking like barns rather than barns trying to be houses, which you see as being alien to this particular landscape character.
And I did note that during the presentation, the officer indicated that he had had a development of the application over time, but he hadn't achieved everything he wanted in terms of recreating the agricultural character. He'd improved it, but not achieved everything he'd set out to achieve. So you have a proposer and a seconder for refusal. Committee members, are you happy that what you're voting on? Can I see a show of hands on the proposal to refuse? Okay, so that's refused on the basis of an impact on landscape character and the form of the development. Okay, well, in which case we will move on to the second application before us. Do you want to have a short recess while Stocklynch leaves? If we could reconvene at 22. Thank you. You have two members. Do you know, Councillor Osborne's clearly coming back. And Jenny. Okay, we'll wait for them before starting. Reconvene with item 6, planning application 1801311 out, land at the Pound Broadway. And this is clearly not Deborah McCann presenting. Mr. Hammond, over to you.
This is actually the first of a number of applications that in our South Somerset guys we had resolved to approve subject to Section 106 agreements, where the Section 106 was not concluded before Natural England issued their letter to us all in August 2020. So this application, together with others in Chard, Ilminster, and obviously the sustainable extensions in Yeovil, will all need to come back to this committee to reconsider because of the time delays between the original resolution and where we are now. But by way of background, this application is for 35 houses, which was resolved to approve by South Somerset's Regulation Committee in January 2019. It's a 1.7 hectare site bounded by Pound Road and Broadway Road to the west of Broadway. Area West had considered it and recommended a refusal. However, regulation overturned that and resolved to approve. This actually touches on an issue that Councillor Whale and I discussed briefly on the first application of the new committee when we were looking at a house close to the Mount Hindrance site. And our issue that as Mount Hindrance didn't technically have a consent, it wasn't the defined edge of the village. So it's the same issue here. You had, in your mind, in your former guise, resolved to approve this scheme, or your predecessors on regulation had resolved to approve this scheme. It is now back before you because the applicant has finally secured a phosphate solution. Just going through the plans, effectively, there's a red line site, a layout, so it's an outline application which established access, area of woodland planting or copse planting being retained to be managed through the Section 106. Looking through the photographs for familiarisation, you can see the road that runs through from Horton up towards Staple Fitzpaine, and the site is on the right-hand side. The roadway running along the front of the site. The view, again, up towards Staple Fitzpaine. View into the site. The nearest property, which is on Pound Road, existing planting, and the planning history. So when South Somerset resolved to approve this scheme, effectively it handed the decision to the respective solicitors to resolve, but it set out a series of heads of terms. And because phosphate solutions, or the need for a phosphate solution, is something that we would secure by way of a Section 106 agreement, we don't actually have a committee mandate to conclude the phosphate element of this decision, because the resolution from the Regulation Committee didn't discuss, other headings. There is also a need to update the affordable housing resolution, because again, at the time we were using affordable housing tenure types that were familiar to us in 2019. Since then, government has introduced the first home tenure type, which is its priority for intermediate shared acquisition units. And again, we had no committee resolution to allow that to be brought forward. So just looking at some of the key issues from the last scheme, there were local concerns about landscape impact, and the Regulation Committee considered the scheme did generally reflect the character of the village where there were pockets of development in depth. It was noted there was no highway objection. There was a footpath proposed back into the village to be funded by the developer. Concerns about local school capacity weren't supported by the LEA. It was, at the time we were talking about, or we were looking at the level of development within Broadway, there was a note that the Bell had a consent, and the Bell is still awaiting its reserved matters consent. By reason of phosphates, there's been limited additional growth since 2019. The decision at the time was made in the context of not having a 5-year supply, but it was set at 4 years, so the tilted balance applied. We know it's currently at 3.7 years, so it's slightly worse. We suspect that when we produce the monitoring report for 2022-23, which effectively records builds from April 22 to March 23, that things will not be any better. We won't improve on 3.7 years, because we'll be 3 years into effectively the embargo on delivering, the level of housing that we're supposed to. So we expect the position to get slightly worse. The applicants have worked with Natural England and Somerset Ecology to provide a phosphate solution, which is effectively to upgrade septic tanks within the area to packaged treatment plants, which is something that is familiar as a solution. It's one of the probably the most widely rolled out solutions at present, and therefore we have no problems with the packaged treatment solution that's been presented, subject to the additional heads of terms which are set out in the report, and also the fact that we need to include for first homes in the Section 106. So in essence, this is about tidying up a resolution that you have previously, or South Somerset had previously made, to ensure that we can issue a consent for this site, hopefully in a timely manner. That's the end of the presentation, Chairman.
Thank you. I have just two speakers. So first is the Parish Council. Peter Gregory, Broadway Parish Council. 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you. It's okay. Broadway Parish Council requests the committee postpones a decision on this application for a few weeks to allow further discussion of a material planning consideration related to the phosphate mitigation report before you. The Parish Council believes that the consultant's report on phosphate mitigation is currently irrelevant to reducing phosphate discharges into the River Ding and thus to watercourses in the Ramsar site. This is because neither the consultant's nor the planning officer's reports consider the adequacy of the local sewer infrastructure. The consultant's report confirms that wastewater draining from the proposed development will be via the Broadway Road sewer. Wessex Water's advice of June 2018 states that this sewer has capacity for the increased flow from the development. However, this advice 5 years ago can no longer be relied upon. This is because Wessex Water now acknowledges that the sewer in Suggs Lane, which takes the flows from Broadway and Horton sewers to the Broadway water treatment plant, is inadequate during stormy wet weather. For this reason, the company attempted flood prevention work on the Suggs Lane sewer in 2022, but without success. As a result, the increasing frequency of periods of heavy rain has meant increasing incidents of foul water gushing from the sewer in Suggs Lane and thus into local properties and the Ding. Last December and January alone, there were 8 recorded incidents where raw sewage from Suggs Lane sewer flowed into the Ding. On one occasion, foul water flooded an adjacent property, causing damage estimated at £180,000. Foul water from the proposed development will significantly add to flows in the Suggs Lane sewer and thus increase the likelihood and extent of further pollution of the Ding and damage to property. The Parish Council requests that the Planning Department convenes a meeting with Wessex Water, Natural England and the Parish Council to explore the water company's plans for dealing with this problem and then report back. The meeting my council requests could be convened quickly and need not delay consideration of the application for more than a few weeks. This committee would then be able to consider the application better informed on its wider impact and reassured that you have safeguarded local properties and the Ding from further sewage contamination. A copy of this statement has gone to Wessex Water and Natural England with a request that they consider the issues involved. I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. The second speaker we have is the applicant, Nick Warfield.
I'll talk. There you go. Technology. I'm not used to this. Okay, thank you. My name is Nick Warfield, Managing Director of Fremantle Developments. We're a property development company that I established 25 years ago. We've built over 1,000 houses across 55 developments to date. Of note, we build out all of our consented developments and we do not sell sites. Our development that we completed in Chard in 2017 is an example of the high quality rural schemes that we are passionate about delivering. Now, we've been working on this site, as John Hammond mentioned, since 2017, and we are very committed to its delivery, having previously undertaken several rounds of public consultation with local residents and the Parish Council. In January 2019, the Council made a resolution to formally approve the scheme we are discussing this evening for 35 homes, including 12 affordable homes. Section 106 has been formally agreed by all parties, in addition to the Section 38 agreement. The Section 278 highway works agreements are now formally agreed, which we spent 19 months dealing with the Council's solicitors. And in fact, I've signed all those documents, and they're with the Council now. Whilst progressing these agreements, we also proceeded with completing full detailed design, as this is an outline planning application, and we spent a considerable sum of money on this planning application, as you can imagine. The scheme delivers benefits to the village, including highway improvements such as a new footway along Broadway Road and traffic calming and gateway features along Pound Road. There have been no material changes since the application was previously considered and approved by committee, and the agreed section 106 only needs to be amended to secure our agreed nutrient neutrality solution for the provision of first homes. Our scheme is policy compliant in all respects, delivering much needed affordable homes at a time when the council has a worsening 5-year housing supply. We've spent the last 3 years working positively alongside the council's case officers, ecologists and Natural England in seeking a solution to the phosphate issue, and thank them for their efforts in working with us collaboratively. Our phosphate solution utilises land that we own and is firmly in our control without any reliance on third parties. I'd like to emphasise that had the nutrient neutrality issue not arisen, this development would have been approved and we would have completed the construction of development by now and it would have been fully occupied. All other matters concerning this application have been formally considered and found to be accepted by the council in previously resolving to grant planning permission. Obviously, I've just heard the gentleman before me speak. I'd like to just add that this is actually an outline planning application and it's gone through all the processes necessary with Wessex Water. We're aware of the issues there and it's nothing has been raised as a problem and this can be dealt with during reserved matters.
You've had your 3 minutes.
Process.
You've had your 3 minutes.
Sorry?
You've had your 3 minutes.
Oh, sorry. That's it. That's all you say. Thank you.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. I'm also the ward member as well for this particular area, for this particular application.
Councillor Osborne.
Sorry?
I'm afraid I'm stepping away from process. Could I just ask the officers to comment on the matter that was raised about the drain?
The issue about whether or not the wastewater treatment works is something that's been raised with me about 10 minutes ago, so it's a new issue. The issue, I think, for the developer and for Natural England is that Wessex Water are obliged to upgrade their treatment works to an efficiency of 0.5 of a milligram per litre by effectively December this year. That's their obligation in AMP7. So I think in terms of the comments that have been made, what we've got is an obligation on Wessex Water to do a piece of work and an apparent failure of Wessex Water to undertake some intermediate works. My concern is that we're looking at potentially a further delay following the parish's request, and I'd like to look at a way that we could arrange a meeting but not hold up the decision. I know I'm getting into subsequent issues, but I think what we're looking at here is how to deal with an obligation by Wessex Water rather than the impacts of a scheme from Mr. Freeman, because his scheme will be nutrient neutral, but Wessex Water have to deliver on their commitments.
If I could just ask a follow-up question. Condition 13, presumably the development can't commence until you're in a position to be satisfied.
The conditions do require submission of further details about foul and surface water drainage, so there are points there. I guess the issue is on the point that the parish have made, whether Natural England are happy that Wessex Water's obligations require them to upgrade these works. So in terms of where we go with this, it may be better if you look at the debate and how members feel, and we can look at how can we manage this, because this isn't a point of principle that the parish are raising, it's a point of a specific operational concern. So I'm just wondering if there are ways that we can manage this so that potentially the applicant can get the reassurance that their scheme's fine, but equally the parish want to have some meeting with Wessex Water to understand their action plan.
Yes, I think my question was, because you could not clear condition 13 until you were satisfied that there was an implementable drainage solution for surface water and foul water, surely you've already got a mechanism built within the conditions that deals with the matter.
It is a fallback position. As I said, if I'd had this query yesterday, I could have spoken to John Stobart at Natural England and said, how should we deal with this, or how would you like us to deal with this? Because Mr. Warfield's scheme relies on Wessex Water doing what they're legally obliged to do, and he can't do any more than that. So, you know, I'm wondering, but I'm trying. This is because this has been sort of quite recent, and it's not something we've been able to prepare for. Whether we commit to having a meeting with Wessex Water, but still resolve to deal with this application and get the legals completed, and whether we have to report back on a meeting with Wessex Water. I think we can separate Wessex Water's management of their kit out from this application, because Wessex Water do have legal obligations which they're clearly breaching. So I'm sort of talking around the subject because I'm trying to think my way through to how can we ensure that the parish do have their discussion and we facilitate that, but equally the applicant after 4 years isn't not put into the long grass for another period of time.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. I am the ward member that does cover Broadway and this application. And I received a sort of email from the parish chairman expressing concerns and that he was going to speak on this matter. I was under the impression that the work had been done and that everything was okay. Clearly it wasn't. So I then sent an email off to Vicky Farwig at Wessex Water asking for an update, and it is that email that I have handed on to John, because I only received that, according to my phone here, at roughly 6 o'clock this evening when I was already engaged in debate. So that's why that has come through quite late. I think that's all we are proposing, and I fully support the chairman in this, that it sounds a sensible approach, that everybody gets around the table, discusses this, and gets something out of Wessex Water as to what they are going to do at their end. Because it seems rather ridiculous, when you think about it, that an applicant has had to spend considerable time and money and delay coming up with an acceptable phosphate solution to solve his problems, but yet at the other end, further up, we have a sewage system that clearly isn't working and is actually adding phosphates in its own right, because it's not working and Wessex's system isn't doing its job. That, I think, is all that's been asked for at this stage, because it's already, in effect, an approved outline application. Going back to the committee meeting, which took place, the regulation committee meeting, one of the things that was asked for, and it's documented in the minutes, which is the second document down in the file, was that there was a request that the Reserve Matters application, when that came forward, did go to Area West for consideration. I'm aware that we are no longer Area West, we are Area South. But all the same, I think it would be helpful for the parish, because it wasn't without controversy, for the Reserved Matters application, when we get to that stage, to come forward for consultation. Thank you.
Mr. Hammond.
Okay. I could touch on the first point about the concerns from the parish and the inability of the applicant to do anything about that. So I could suggest that you agree the recommendation, but we don't issue any decision until a meeting has been held with Wessex Water and they've provided an action plan. That would be my recommendation, because the applicant can't do anything about what Wessex Water are legally obliged to do. On the point about Area West / Area South, under the old scheme of delegation, there was a chair discretion as to whether a ward member request for referral to committee was accepted or not. As a major application, if either the ward member asks for it to come to committee or the parish objects and the officers is supportive, it automatically comes to committee. So you have greater control that Area South will see the Reserve Matters application, because you have the 21 days from consultation to deal with that. So I think that's a point we don't need to sort of necessarily re-minute. But as I said, my suggestion on the first point is that I would like to press forward with the recommendation, but recommend that we don't issue anything until we've had the meeting and Wessex has provided us with a written response.
Yeah, Chairman.
I see broad agreement with that principle. So
Can I propose that we go with that line, that we accept the recommendation of the officers subject to a satisfactory meeting and solution coming between us and Wessex Water and the powers that be, so to speak?
I don't want to be a doomsayer, but the word satisfactory feels like it's I can commit to arrange a meeting, and I can commit to asking Wessex Water to provide a written plan. I can't commit that everybody will like what they say, but we can put that process in place.
Okay, well, I'll remove the word satisfactory, but at least if we get a plan out of Wessex Water, we're getting somewhere.
Councillor Curley.
I'm more than happy to second that.
Does anyone else want to speak? Okay, in that case, I think we have a motion to accept the planning officer's recommendations, subject to the arrangements of a meeting and the to require the presentation of a plan by Wessex Water. Can I see all of those who are in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Just before we rise, can I just ask, has there been any news on the last committee's request for additional meeting space to be considered?
I did obviously brought that up with, well, Angie Potts, specialist, and also, sorry, that one's not very good, the head on legal and governance, and also to the director. Basically, what they're saying is it does need to go, it will be part of the planning review, so that if you've got your issues with regards to the meetings, then it does need to be sort of put through the planning review, because there are obviously, I think there's other issues with other committee meetings being asked for as well. So it's not a straight, it's going to be part of the ongoing planning review, really. And I can't say any more than that, really, at the moment. I don't know any more than that. I'll just try and get, sorry, let me just try and get my email up that I had. Yeah, so it will have to go to this 6 monthly planning review of planning meetings. There are competing requests for more frequent meetings. Other meetings have been asked for as well, I know, in other areas, certainly with the planning to keep up with the determination of the applications. But obviously there's the issue with staff, both from planning and democratic services, to be able to administer any more meetings. So unfortunately it will go as part of the review. So it's a wider issue, I'm afraid, rather than just this meeting.
Okay, I wasn't really intending this to be an update. It was just to, a debate. But go on, Councillor Curley.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick plug as Vice Chair of Constitution and Governance. We will be, this is timetabled that we will be looking at this, so I would invite you all to come along and give your input, please, to us at C&G. Thank you.
Councillor Wales.
I was going to ask where it was going to. Does it go strategic planning?
Councillor Osborne.
It's Constitution and Governance.
That's fine.
Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, that was part of the work that was scheduled in for Constitution and Governance to do before I left. However, what I was going to ask was, how big is, I get the impression that the backlog for Area South is one of the biggest. What is the risk that if we wind up with too big a backlog, we run the risk of people going straight to appeal on the grounds of non-determination because we can't get them into a committee meeting?
Mr. Hammond, I believe we've had one already dash in that direction, haven't we?
We've just had 3 non-determination appeals in this week. For schemes that are actually relatively recent, so I'm a little bit surprised by them. Obviously, if an applicant believes that they're going to get a fair hearing and they are kind of at that final hurdle, and there's no reason to suspect that there are fundamental problems, they would rather go through the committee process rather than add the 6 months engaging with PINs. So I guess, you know, they'll be looking at our track record and they'll be looking at the decisions we're churning out. So today's is kind of helpful because it's one of the first ones that's been able to get put back through the system. But I think that it will all be in the mix. Most people would rather go through the committee process because it will be quicker than trying to trigger a non-determination appeal with, you know, a longer timetable. The issue, sorry, just to bang on a bit, the issue for us is we do have this sort of 50 or 60 major applications which, if they have a parish objection, have to come here if we're going to support them. So, you know, there will be a chunk of work, and it will come in peaks and troughs because the phosphate credit solutions that are out there tend to be sold in one go. So we'll see nothing for a month, and then you'll see a credit solution that's been sold for 400 houses worth, and then we'll suddenly see those being lined up. So we can't tell you that there's going to be a continuous program. We will get peaks and then possibly nothing the following month. So I think what our ideal is to have a reserve date that we may not need to call upon, but then we might need for sort of 2 months on the trot.
If I could just press you on one last point. I think you've indicated to me privately that this cuts in the autumn is when we have the next likely peak.
Well, there are credit markets currently running in the River Parrett. Entrade are running one. There's one in Staple Fitzpaine, which is perversely in Old Taunton Dean, but it's actually the Parrett catchment, and there's about 100 kilos there. So it depends whether they're sold to big developers and we get some of the big schemes coming back to committee, or whether they're sold to the smaller people. But, you know, we're looking at sort of 1,400 houses worth of credit being available in the River Parrett before the end of this year. So I don't see the scheme, I don't see August being a logjam. I suspect September might be the start of us having to build up.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes the business for tonight. So thank you for your attendance and perseverance on these matters. Okay, bye-bye.